students, welcome to another lesson. This is our last lesson for this term, unfortunately. Um, but there is still a lot of work for you to do, so the course does not end here yet. So today we are going to talk about nasals and liquids. Nasals are the sonorants with the greatest amount of nasals are produced with an open velopharyngeal port. Flow of air is stopped in the mouth, right? For example, n, m, stopped in mouth, but air flows freely through the nose. So this, what we call velopharyngeal port, meaning that it goes towards the back of your throat to the nose or to the nasal cavity. The air pressure does not build up behind stop constriction because it goes out from through your nose, and the voicing is not impeded at the glottis. The speech ready position, we can check out Ken Stevens' x-ray. So I'll show you what a speech ready position is. Just a second here. Yeah. So this is basically a speech ready position where the velum is lowered, but it gets raised for the air not to go through your nose. It's speech ready position because we have to breathe, right? And you usually breathe through your nose, and the air through your nose has to go to your lungs.
Pe, a te, a ke, a pa, a ta, a ka, a de, a ne,
So saying hne here.
a ne, a se, a ze, a sa, hep, het, heck, hop, hot, hawk, a t, a ti, a ta, a tu, a tu, a tet, a tot, a tech, a pet.
So for all of these, the velum is raised, right?
Saw, hep, a se, a ze, a saw, hep, het, heck, hop, a de, a ne.
Except for her ne, right? It's lowered here, right? All right, and we know that. Nasal stops are familiar to you. We've talked about those. And Yanuwa, for example, language has all the nasal contrasts there are. So this is a bilabial nasal. Ma.
Umordala.
Umalala.
Ununu.
Ununu. This is laminal dental nasal.
Unala.
Unala.
Warnura.
Warnura, right? This is a retroflex one, or as if you want to produce Warnura, but you're producing Warnura, right?
Nyanyalo.
Nyanyalo, this is Nye. Just different set of conventions here. Usually in the IPA system, we would mark it like this, right? Yeah. Then there is front velar.
Luwangu.
Luwango.
Wangolo.
Wanulu, right? Back velar because of, I guess, back vowels as well. And here it's amongst back vowels, but it's a little bit fronter.
Luwangu.
Luwango, right? Something like that. All right. You can also get a nasal stop at one place of articulation where oral stops never occur, and that's labiodental nasal stop. So this would be amma.
Amma.
And this would be
Amma.
Ma, right? Ma occurs allophonically, so labiodental, you're touching your upper teeth with your lower lip. Ma, ma. In English, for example, dumbfounded, comfort, even Banff, but Banff, usually the A or a vowel is nasalized. In Catalan, in fermer, in Italian, invece, so on and so forth. It occurs allophonically in many languages. Flow of air through nose reduces the airflow through mouth, so that's something you need to remember. and vocal tract airflow is too weak for frication at the labiodental closure. So basically, you cannot have labiodental as an oral stop, but you can have it as a nasal stop, right? Because the air has to go through somewhere. All right. Nasalization is disastrous for fricatives, so there are no uncontroversial nasal fricatives in the languages of the world. That's because of the aerodynamics, right? So air is going through your vocal tract, and it's if you want to make a fricative, you can make a fricative, but then you cannot make a nasal at the same time, and that's really impossible. What you can make are some voiceless nasals in a few languages, such as Burmese, ma, instead of ma. I'll just play for you, baby, voiced ones. Na, nya, nya, na. I'm not imitating their intonation, but never mind. You can now try and say voiceless one as if you're saying ma, 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 na, na, nya, 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 right? So these are voiceless nasals, and we had that as one of our questions for midterm, whether voiceless nasals are possible. Yes, they are possible. And if you see that this nasal voiceless diacritic is above, or is a superscript rather than a subscript, then that means that it has the same meaning, but because you have this curly hook below, or below the consonant, right, visually, then you don't want another diacritic there. That's why it's up there, and it means completely the same. So these are voiceless nasals stops that are possible, and probably contrastive in Burmese, right? But you cannot make a nasal fricative. Breathy voiced nasals exist as well. For example, Nevari, spoken in Nepal, has these
Ma,
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 na,
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 na.
na, right? So obviously the vowels are also long, and you're using your breathy voice right there. Nasal acoustics. So the acoustics of nasal stops is quite complex. The general pattern, what to look for, is the periodic voicing. So you have voicing, your glottal folds are working, and it's usually voiced. And we are going to talk about English nasals, of course. The overall amplitude is lower than in vowels, right? And we'll see why. Actually, you may be able to answer it right now, right? We have low frequency at the first formant, and higher formants have a low intensity. Formants have broad bandwidth, so they are a little bit spread out in their glottal pulses, and that's why the differences between frequencies are different. And the characteristics are visible, right, in a spectrogram, even in a waveform. So in a waveform, you can say, okay, this is probably a vowel because it has high air pressure. This part here is probably going to be something else, some voiced portion, and in this case, it's a voiced nasal. Right. On a spectrogram, it's clearly visible where the boundary lies between nasals and vowels, and that's something you should remember. So the boundary is very visible, right? The middle frequencies are damped as well. Even higher ones are damped, right? The spectrogram is a little bit smeared. There are still glottal pulses, but glottal pulses are not as narrow or as frequent as for a vowel, right? That too. So all of these characteristics, and F1 is quite lower. Look at it. It's here, and for it's probably here, right? So it's lower than for a vowel. All right. So we understand that. Why does this damping occur? So the decreased overall amplitude of nasals is due to several factors, including damping. Recall the resonance. Resonance occurs when a sound wave travels through an object, and then sound wave is reflected and reinforced on a periodic basis. So basically, remember we talked about harmonics and how certain harmonics are amplified and others are damped. So opposite of resonance is damping, right? The opposite of that. So some harmonics are reduced, right? Their intensity, their loudness is reduced. So the periodic reinforcement sets up alternating patterns of high and low area pressure, and we get standing waves. We talked about that, we drew that one. For example, if you have a speaker to this side here and you play a pulse into the closed tube, the area of air pressure here is the highest. Then as it travels, the area of air pressure here is the highest now. And as it travels, the area of air pressure here is the highest. And then it bounces off, right? And goes back to its place where it was started. Well, we also have, because this is the area of higher pressure, and the area of higher pressure means the area of compression, we also have areas of rarefaction. Area of rarefaction is created here, and it also goes down there, right? And here they balance it off, basically, so the air pressure is same all the way through. And the areas of rarefaction continues its journey, or continue their journey, and the areas of compression continue their journey as well. So that's how a standing wave travels in a closed tube, right? However, if a tube is closed, right, and if we do not if we do not try to get another pulse, and then another pulse, and then another pulse, the pressure will dampen, right? It will die out. Why? Well, the walls of the tube absorb some of the acoustic energy with each reflection of the standing wave. So the walls of the tube will absorb some of that energy, right? And damping can be heavy and light. If it's heavy, then the air pressure dampens or dies out very quickly, or more quickly than for a lightly damped wave. What are the damping factors? The amount of damping in a tube is a function of the volume of the tube, so it depends on how big the tube is, right? The volume. The surface area of the tube, what it is made of, right? And the material, right? Basically what it is made of, but also surface area, whether it's I guess curvy, whether it's flat, whether it's pointy, or so on and so forth. So all of these three affect the damping, the amount of damping, the degree of damping of the tube, of the wave in a tube. More volume, more surface area, more damping. So the bigger the hole, the bigger this room is, the greater the damping it is. But there are different objects around me, so that can influence the acoustics. They say, oh, good acoustics of the room, right? Well, I don't know, maybe. Maybe it depends on for what you need it. Think about that. Sorry, the video paused for a second. So I was talking about the volume of the tube, the surface area of the tube, the material of which the tube is made. So more volume, more surface area, more damping, right? And you can think about the resonant characteristics of a Home Depot, for example, a postmodern restaurant, a movie theater, and an echoic chamber. Home Depot is huge, right? Huge warehouse, and the sound will travel very well there, but it will be a little bit damped because very well because it hits off, it bounces off all the way, but it will be damped because of a huge area, right? A postmodern restaurant does not want you to have probably does not want you to have a conversation um, in a quiet space. It wants you to feel like you're in the crowd, right? Like everything is loud around you. You can hear the kitchen is open, right? You can basically see it there in the middle, probably in the middle of a restaurant, let's say, or somewhere there close to you. All the clanking and tinkling of the silverware and cookware that you are hearing is because the modern restaurants don't have carpets as well that can absorb the sound a little bit. So all of that is created in that kind of atmosphere. And if you're believers in conspiracy theory, you may think that those restaurants want you to eat more rather than talk more, right? So to order and spend more money. Movie theater, on the other hand, wants the sound to be damped, right? It has soft cushions everywhere. It has soft chairs, and soft walls, right, to the sides, because the noise it can get louder, and it does not want you to feel that echo, right? Echo in the room. An anechoic chamber is a chamber that looks something like this. So it's a like an extreme version of damping of the noise and sound. This person is probably recording something in the anechoic chamber, and the anechoic chamber has all of these very soft walls, or some material that is placed on the walls which is really soft, and it has sharp and pointy um, uh, sides, so that air can get into these holes, and that air does not come out, or at least not to that extent. So all of that absorbs the air very well, so that so if you say hello, you don't hear it as an echo. Hello, 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 right? For example, why are we talking about this at all, right? Why is this important? Well, your nose is something like anechoic chamber. Um, Air flows through the nasal cavity, right? So it goes through your nose, and the resonating filter on nasal sounds has, for example, increased volume, increased surface area. But the resonating filter of nasal sounds also has increased damping. Why is that so? Well, because of the material that your nose is made from. So it has some kind of mucus, it has septum, it has soft tissue. So, and the soft tissues are not really flat. There are so many holes in there, right? So many holes, and the air gets into those holes, right? Air, of course, protects your nose from getting dry completely as well, so that's something good for Alberta, I guess. But when it gets into your nose, it becomes damped, right? And damping, it decreases the amplitude, right? So if the sound gets damped, then that means that the amplitude is lower, and then voice or the sound is less loud or quieter, right? So damping decreases amplitude and spreads energy across a wide range of frequencies. And we know that it spreads energy across a wide range of frequencies because it is getting into all of these holes. It is producing so many frequencies, but those frequencies are damped, and increases the bandwidth. So the difference between the frequencies is increased as well. And this is what it looks like in the spectrogram. So the difference between the frequencies is increased. There is a lot of damping here, a lot of silent portions, so to say, right? The white parts. There are still glottal pulses, glottal bars over there, and low F1, right? And high, I would say maybe, I don't know, maybe that's F3 as well, but still a bit increased energy in F3 rather than F2, which is completely damped. So the bandwidth is also larger. Basically the pulsing of the frequencies is larger, meaning that bandwidth will be increased rather in comparison to the vowels over here. So the formants in nasals have increased bandwidth in comparison to formants in vowels. Oops. What did I do? Okay. One last random thing about nasals. It is possible to release an oral stop closure by opening up the velopharyngeal port. So the release burst caused thereby is referred to as nasal plosion. For example, if you, and in this way you're not making a vowel at all. For example, sudden, sudden, leaden, sadden, right? Let's hear Peter Ladefoged producing these with a nasal plosion.
Hidden, sadden, sudden, led,
right?
hidden, sadden, sudden, leaden.
Yes, so all of these are produced with a schwa between, and these are not. So you get dn, and that's a plosion, nasal plosion, whereby you don't get to basically the air goes directly from your mouth, or it gets pushed into the nose just before you are even producing a vowel, and that's how you are going from d to n. Sudden, leaden, and so on and so forth. Nasal plosion occurs in pre-stopped nasals in Russian, in my language as well. For example, this is the same word as in my language. Dno.
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 Dna.
Dna. Yes, dna is the of the day. In my language, for example, you would have dno. We would say actually dno dna, dno dna, as referring to the bottom of what you can reach, the bottomless hole, dno dna, the worst, right? For example, if the behavior at the recent Oscars was the worst, you can say it was dno dna, it was the worst, right? Something like that. And that's nasal plosion occurring over there, right? Okay. Sorry, I have to grab some water because we are moving to laterals, and I'll need some water there. All right, we've covered the nasals. Now we are about to cover the liquids, or laterals. Laterals are produced by constricting the sides of the tongue towards the center of the mouth. For example, L is a lateral approximant. So for L, you're constricting the sides of the tongue towards the center of the mouth. So you're basically making tongue do this, so that air can go past your tongue, and that's why we call these laterals. Laterals can also be formed by constricting on one side of the mouth only, so the other side of the mouth still remains the same. You can do that as well, and we learned this through lateral palatography, where you basically have a mixture of oil and charcoal, and then you rub it upon a person's tongue and see where they place their tongue by producing a word, and after they have produced a word, the traces are left. There are several lateral places of articulation. We're familiar with L. This is a retroflex. Or La. Palatal one, like an upside down U or Y, right? This is a velar, capital L. Allah. And for this one, there's an interesting story. Ladefoged was apparently at some part of the world investigating sounds, and he was describing that there was the retroflex palatals, retroflex laterals exist, palatal laterals exist, but velar laterals do not. And then some guy stood up and said, well, I'm producing that one. And that's how it entered the IPA, allegedly, right? Hopefully that's not a myth. There are also two symbols for lateral fricatives. They're voiceless and voiced alveolars. Ashla, ashla, right? So if you're making, as if you're making a little bit of um, mucus in your mouth. Ashla, ashla. This one resembles the shla, right? Ashla, ashla, right? And it does actually, it's indicative here of j, right? Ashla. That's why this is the case. Okay. Italian contrasts alveolar and palatal laterals. We have already listened to these. Let's listen to them again because Italian is nice and beautiful language.
Li,
Li,
gli,
gli,
folla,
folla,
foglia,
foglia, velare,
velare, vegliare, vegliare,
vegliare, right? Retroflex laterals are present in Toda, for example.
kal,
Kal,
pal,
pal, right? As if you're producing earl, pal, 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 right? Toda is spoken in southern India. Toda and many India actually languages in India have retroflex stops, fricatives, laterals, right? There is unaspirated one
Pul.
in Korean, pul,
tal,
tal, and fortis,
pul,
pul,
tal,
dal,
pul,
pul,
tal,
tal, right? In Korean, fortis, aspirated, and regular ones are three voicing configuration in Korean, and you will talk more about those, or you will learn more about those in 441. Other laterals are present in Mid-Wagi, which is spoken in the highlands of New Guinea.
Ala ala.
Alla alla. So this is laminal dental, whereby you have la, but it touches the upper teeth.
Alala.
Alala,
Adale.
alale, alale.
Adale.
So for this one, you're trying to maybe go back with the tongue, of course, with the back of your tongue, especially, as if you're making some kind of dark L, but trying to touch your velum.
Adale.
Alale, alale.
Lala.
In Zulu, we have lala, and we have fricatives.
Lala.
Lala,
Shanza.
danza, right? So Zulu has, in contrast, alveolar lateral approximants and fricatives. As for the lateral acoustics, laterals have resonances like vowels, but are weaker in intensity. So their resonances resemble vowel like pronunciations. They have voicing bars, right? They have F1, F2, but they also have smeared formed frequencies, or just frequencies, just because the sound is damped as well, right? So this is alala,
Alala.
and this is a alala, all right, a la that you might find in Canadian as in leaf at the beginning of words, so it's not dark L. Laterals are usually more intense than nasal. That's one thing to notice. So they're maybe more intense. They have less volume and less surface area, less damping. So because of this less volume, because air does not go through your nose, and less surface area, there's less damping. There is a break between vowels and laterals, and this break is less clear. It's much clearer for n. That's how we can distinguish these. This is Allah. I think this is produced by Dr. Winters. His laws are always dark ones.
Allah.
Allah,
Anna.
Anna, right? So what you can see here is basically the lowering, because this is a dark L and it's towards a velar, and velar sounds are back sounds, the lowering of F2, the lowering of F1 as well. What else you can see is that the break here is not as clear as with nasals, right? And in this case, it does say that laterals are usually more intense than nasals. In this case, they're not really more intense. Their formant frequencies are more intense, right? And their F1 of nasals is quite low, right? And laterals follow the formant frequencies of the vowels, especially those vowels are at the same place of articulation. For example, both are back, right? Vowels and liquid. And are primarily, they're called also liquids, and they're primarily distinguished by F3, but F3 is much lower in R. So let's take a look at this. Look at how low the F3 is in R, right? R. And that's because depending on how you're making R, you're basically you're basically extending the tube by making R in comparison to L. You're extending the tube a little bit by bunching up your tongue or by curling it up, which means that you would have a lower frequencies. For F1 and F2, these are pretty much the same, but F3 differs, and that's where you get your Q for That's where F3 is important. Otherwise, it's not. F3 is not as important as F1 and as F2 because we don't tend to hear those frequencies very well. Those higher frequencies, we don't tend to have to pay attention to those so much in our perception. So auditorily, but also acoustically, they are less prominent, less intense than F1 and F2.
Ara. Allah.
Allah. Right. Dark versus clear L often has a low F2 in English because it's velarized, right? Because of velarization, which is present here, F2 is lower, unlike here where it is higher, right? High up there. And different dialects use velarization in English. Some dialects velarize it everywhere, right? Number 3. Some velarized everywhere except before front vowels, such as leak, right? And L is velarized only in syllable final position, such as keel, right? All, but not in the first position. So those are the different variations of L, right? And here in this case, this is a velarized L.
Leak.
As I said, the Dr. Winters velarizes it everywhere, and we can see very clearly that it's velar, very low F2 frequency, lowers down the vowel, right? And even very low F1 in comparison to this one, whereby these two are not very low. Still, it's velar. It gets lower than for a clear L, which is here, right? So that's something to think about. This L does not look anything different, or it does look different a little bit from M or N because it's more intense, I think, than these two. And the transition is not so abrupt as in nasals. Here the transition is also not so abrupt, but we have kind of a traces of this transition that is curvy, right? And that's important to take a look at. All right. A velarization in English, note, leads to low F1 and low F2, and it closely resembles O sometimes. So you're getting towards the back, high back vowel, O, right? And some dialects say some dialects all L disappears and the velarization is left behind. For example, in the Columbus, Ohio, instead of oldies, I say oldie station, right? And if you think about it, it makes sense that all disappears completely. So there is a deletion of all in there. A very important note about F3. F3s are unusual, as I said, for auditory reasons. They're sensitive to frequency distinctions, well, because they drop off in the higher frequency regions, those frequency distinctions, and for us, perceptually, we don't hear those, and acoustically as well. However, English R has very low F3, so very low F3, and that's because English R is distinctive because it has a low R F3, because you are curling and bunching your tongue back.
bird,
Right? And again,
borrow,
right? Let's see how. So R typipally combines three different approximant constrictions: postalveolar, retroflex, lip rounding, labialization, and pharyngeal constriction, pharyngealization. So R might be better transcribed like this, but we don't want to do that. That's too many critics. So R has certain labialization for sure. So when you're making a R, rough, rule, around, you're rounding your lips a little bit, right? Just like you're doing for sh. And there is a pharyngeal constriction at the back. However, it's not very prominent, it's not always used, so we can disregard that one. English speakers make the retroflex constriction in two different ways, and we will do this in a class, in person. We might not use toothpicks, we can use these for sticks or plastic straws for mixing coffee. What you can do is, so either English speakers make R's by bunching their tongue, doing this, right, or curling it up, right, this, so this or that. And this means that there are two ways of producing the retroflex R. How you can determine whether you're producing the retroflex R in one or the other way is by creating a toothpick experiment. This time it's a straw experiment, and what you can do is make R, and insert your straw into the mouth. R. If it touches the back part of your tongue, then you're curling the tongue up. If it's touching the front part of your tongue, then you're bunching your tongue, right? So basically, if it's touching the front part of your tongue when you insert it, you're bunching. If it's touching the back part of your tongue, you're curling it. And I'm curling it, right? What are you doing, right? So the articulation of R is very complex. That's why kids do not always attain or acquire R first, right? But much later on. Retroflexion can influence a lot of vowels. So vowels that are influenced by the retroflex are said to be rhoticized. Rhoticized vowels are contrasted in Badaga, a language spoken in southern India, and they are more observable with frontal vowels.
Be,
Be, bear,
kasu,
karsu, right? And maybe this one. Do. Yeah, not a lot of retroflexion. Po, as in poor. Oge, right? And Rotz's vowel spectrograms are also clear in terms that the F3 is lowered, right? So the F3 is basically sitting on the F2, unlike here where it's not, right? So, for example,
bear,
bear, right? So we can see that F3 is much lower and over there sitting almost on top of F2. Roticized vowels in English are quite prominent, and some of you transcribed vowels in English like that. I was okay with that, but try to have a syllabic R for Canadian American English because they are usually produced like that. So vowels before R in Canadian American English are consistently roticized. For example, production of hard. These are my two productions of hard. So this is hard.
hard,
We can see the F3 going down. Okay, yes, the F3 going down. Let me just, okay, so that light won't turn off. So F3 is going down very vividly, and this is a hard, right, where F3 is remaining steady. Hard. And
hard,
right. Okay. Recall there is a reduced set of vowel contrasts in this environment, such as ear, air, or r. Not every vowel can be roticized. I mean, in theory maybe, but there is a reduced set of vowel contrast in this environment. And also note that there are alternative transcriptions for syllabic R, such as these two, for example, R and air, as in bird, right, as in English bird, and herd, for example, something like that. Instead of making syllabic R, you can do these. I was fine with that, as you know, but in North American English and Canadian, you can freely say sometimes that it's really syllabic R. There are a handful of approximants in the IPA which are not considered glides, but because they don't correspond to high vowel articulations. So that's important to say. These are not really gliding, right, as if they were high vowels, but they are, for example, labiodental approximant. Right? This one is produced in Serbian phonetically, for example, for the word voda. There's so many words: trava, grass, siva, gray, siva, and so on and so forth. There is also an alveolar approximant, ara, and which is more prominent in maybe in British English. Retroflex one. Retroflex one, and there are also flaps and taps. This is an tap or flap, an alveolar. Ara, like city. City. And there is also a retroflex tap or flap. Ara. So you're basically making a tap or flap with your tongue, and you're curling it back at the same time. Ara. And there is also an alveolar lateral flap, which is quite unusual. I think at some Japanese stems or occurs sometimes. Ara. So it's produced by flapping your tongue, but making it lateral, so you're bunching it up towards the center. Ara. And the difference between taps and flaps is not always so obvious, but taps are strictly speaking up and down movement, right? So brief contact, up and down, as in Spanish, caro. Flap is a brief contact during backwards and forwards movement, so it is basically more as if ladder, right? Rather than just up and down. So you're going back and forwards, and there is a movement in between that we call flap, as if for flapping doors, right? You can try these out by saying the sentence fast 3 times. That had a dead, had edited it. That had a dead, had edited it. That had a dead, had edited it. Right? And see whether you're producing tap or flap, but you will probably be producing a tap in this case. It goes by very fast. Taps, of course, for example, in Spanish,
pero,
pero,
perro,
perro, right, are quite distinct from trills, because trills, as we said, have many of these closings and openings of something, right, or hittings and not hittings, right. In this case, 3 times, and in this case, only once. Pero,
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 perro,
perro, right, and right, right, and trills are quite prominent in words of languages, in languages of the world. Right. Finally, we've come the full circle. We remember that we started our class with labiodental flap, and this was the last IPA symbol that was introduced to the IPA, or the symbol that was introduced to the IPA. And we've, if you remember, okay, let me see where it is now. I lost it. Okay, I did not. We played this labiodental flap movie for you, whereby this person is producing aveturu, right? When by his lip is going back and forwards and then making a contact with teeth. And you can see it here, right? Right, and that's why they were using a mirror to see it better. Okay, we've come full circle. I have to say I've enjoyed teaching for you. Your course is not over yet. You have some assignments to do, and of course a final exam. Please ask me any questions if you have. Thank you for listening and for being attentive, and I hope to see you very, very soon.